You're listening to the Deidre Reigel Hope and Healing Radio Show, where your voice matters. We're glad you're here and believe you will be too. And now, Deidre Reigel with today's guest.
This is Deidre Reigel coming to you from sunny and cold Florida on this wonderful January day, and I have the absolute privilege and pleasure of having Debra Jayne East on the line with me today for our radio interview. Debra, welcome to the show. It is just a delight for you to be here.
Deidre, I am thrilled. You are one of my favorite people. I've been looking forward to this all day.
Oh, me too. Me too, Debra. Well, I understand you've had quite the holiday season, and so I welcome you to 2018 with all good thoughts for the year ahead. And so I'm so eager to get to the meat of the matter today and the purpose of our interview. You have just come out with yet another book, and you're calling it Synchronicity, the Message of the Heartstone. And you're telling about your growing up in the rural countryside of the Blue Ridge Mountain, and something very special that happened to you when you were growing up that has, I think, led you to becoming an author, a researcher, and a radio host for a show called Notes from the Underground and Starlight 17 Radio. And I know, Debra, that you specialize in helping UFO abductees to cope with their experience. I know also that you're an intuitive, and this is from knowing you as I have, just in the short time we've been friends, and that you specialize in energy reading. So all of this is going to make for a great interview, and to our audience listeners, I can tell you we're going to have a great time up here. So Debra, first of all, just catch our audience up here with how you grew up, and tell us a little bit more about yourself, please.
Okay, well, I grew up in the rural mountains of Virginia, which is known as the Blue Ridge Mountains, and it's beautiful up there. I mean, it's just blue sky, and the communities are spread out, and they are, houses are off to themselves, nestled in between big valleys and different things like that. So I grew up the oldest of 6 girls. Yes, my father was just about crazy. There were 6 of us. But one night when we were all sitting inside, watching television, which, this was, way before computers and cell phones, where we actually talked to each other and did things.
Oh, yes.
And yes. So we were all watching something on television. It was pretty late. It was like 11:30. I think it might have been Shock Theater. It was one of my favorites. But we were just all sitting around, and, we were raised real simply. We had a farm, and we grew our own vegetables and different things like that. I went to high school. That was back in the days of Steppenwolf and the Beatles and all that kind of stuff, to let you know how old I am, which was actually, I was 12 years old in 1968. So that night, as we were watching television, our dog, which was a Labrador, his name was Bear, started barking, and it was a high-pitched bark, like somebody was outside. And so my dad walked over to the window and looked out, and he went to the door, and he was gone for maybe a minute. Well, he came back inside, and very hurriedly he said, "Everybody come out here. You've got to see this." So all of us got up, sort of slowly, and then we all, got woke up and went out there and went over to the end of the balustrade, and instantly everything just became like a surreal dream. We looked up into the sky, and I saw my dog towards the edge of our yard, and he had his head pointed up in the direction of a huge hill that was right across from the creek from our house. And over the hill was a slowly moving craft that was about the size of a tractor trailer. And it was saucer-shaped. It had a center spinning wheel of colors that blinked, constantly, like they call them the running lights, I believe. And very slowly this thing was moving towards our house. Well, the first thing that happened is everybody, our mouths just dropped open, and we couldn't say anything. We're sort of like in shock. And we just stood there, and the only noise that we could hear was our dog, barking. And after we stood there for about 10 minutes watching that get around 500 feet away from us, right before it got to the big weeping willow tree, it just hovered there. And I looked at my dad, and right then the dog came over, Bear came over, and his hackles were raised up. He was like very agitated. And I asked my dad, I said, shouldn't we call somebody or do something? And he said no. He said, they'll just think we're crazy. Yeah. And I thought to myself, that is really sad. Why should we be thought of as crazy for telling the truth? Well, after about a minute after that, our dog started running towards the edge of the yard and followed the craft about a mile out the road as it moved slowly, sort of going backwards and forwards. So at 12 years old, there is nobody that could tell me that UFOs do not exist.
Of course.
Yeah, it was the moonlight was out. We could see it clearly. Didn't have any wings. It made no sound. The shape was clearly visible. So after that, I knew that those things had existed and that it's something that nobody wanted to talk about in public. So that's how this really all got started. And it seems like it opened up a door in my life. I spoke to my grandmother about it. She related seeing things like this when she was growing up. So, and it does tend to run in families and everything.
I hear that, and this for me, as I listen to you, it seems to me like it would have been what we would call a defining moment for you, where your life changed from looking at everything from this idyllic countryside, country life that you had. You grow your own vegetables, and the family's very close, to your world changes. And what I find interesting is that your family was with you. So your family as a unit experienced this together. So, and in a way, I love that for you, although I know it was probably a very, in some ways, a traumatic experience, but you didn't have to go it alone and think, am I really hallucinating here? Am I crazy? Your entire family experienced, and your father, bless his heart, with all of that estrogen around him, was able to say, we won't tell anybody, and be very protective, and say, we won't tell anyone of this. So my question to you at this point is, as a 12-year-old, how do you assimilate that kind of life-changing, thought-changing information, Debra?
Well, I'll have to say this, that from an early age, science was my favorite topic, and I was a straight-A student in school, and so I had always, it seemed like from the very beginning, been interested in astronomy, space, planets, and all that kind of stuff. So I had sort of a natural instinct, to be inquisitive. And there weren't that many things on the television about UFOs. There were some, the old movies that they had, which, had graphics, with the shaking, flying saucers. And then a movie came out, The Day the Earth Stood Still. Do you remember that movie?
I do.
Right. When I watched that movie with Michael Rennie, I think is what his name was, and it was eye-opening. And all of a sudden, it was a movie that took it serious. What would happen if a real UFO landed? And it was terrifying, but it was also interesting because that movie really opened up a lot of doors and a lot of questions for me. And it wasn't long after that my parents were involved in a 1987 UFO event in Whitsville, where there were multiple sightings of craft and stuff. I think there were 2,000 reports of craft, and it got a lot of attention, and it was within 12 miles of our home. All of these things just kept on reiterating to me that we are not alone.
Oh,
and
yes,
that
of course.
To get that many sightings and for our country to tell us that we are hallucinating or that we are crazy just didn't go with me. So I always always hate to have a mystery. I always thought I would be a good mystery investigator because I hate things not adding up. I love to get the pieces of the puzzle and put everything together. Oh, after that event, I just became more determined to find out some answers for myself.
Of course you did, because you knew what you saw, and there are so many people who have had firsthand sightings or firsthand experiences, and I think we all know someone who can say, I saw a UFO or I had a certain experience, and the sense of course, we're not alone. We look at how big just our galaxy is, and, what are the odds of being the only intelligent life in the galaxy even. I think that any free-thinking, intelligent person will come to the conclusion that we are not alone. But for someone like yourself who's had these experiences and had them again and again, this takes on another value in your life, and you speak about the fear factor versus that some of these entities and beings are very friendly and very helpful, some are not, and we're very aware of that. What I love about what you're saying is you talked about certain television shows, certain movies, and I'm a big believer that movies like Star Wars, Star Trek, I was a big fan of Star Trek myself, I think are what I would call soft disclosure or thought disclosure that can be used by the entertainment industry and assimilated by us as watchers and listeners to open our mind to the idea that there are indeed life forms in this planet that are intelligent and are reaching out to us for various reasons, whether nefarious or beneficial. And I really love these movies that open our minds, and I'm sure that you did too, as a way of processing the information and ratifying that you're not crazy. This is indeed something very real and very life-changing for you.
You're right, and I couldn't agree with you more, Deidre, because everybody remembers Steven Spielberg's movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Well, this movie was based on real research, and it was so real that NASA sent Spielberg a 15-page letter trying to get him not to publish the movie. Wow. And, of course, he hung tight, and it did end up being published and was a very well-received movie. I totally agree with you. And, currently the X-Files is a big hit series. And last year, just about every show was based on conspiracy theories that are out there that I know to be true, and they were highlighted by the X-Files. So these producers, they're not crazy. They research, they get real info that is out there, prevalent in the underground with all the alternative news stations and things like that, and they expand on them. And I'm thankful that they do, because it's really very comforting to see a theory that for a fact has happened with people, because I've interviewed hundreds of abductees, and then you see it in a television show, because finally when abductees watch these things, they give a big sigh of relief, like, wow, man, I'm not so nuts, so after all, I'm not so crazy. Because
absolutely,
being thought of as crazy is the tool that our government uses to discredit us.
Oh, of course. Well, I noticed you used the word abductee, and so I think that is something that has happened to you, that you've experienced the abduction process, and if you feel to share in our time together, Debra, I would love for you to encapsulate that for us, if you're willing.
Well, I'd be glad to. A lot of times abductees do not remember being abducted for a long time, because while you're in it, usually it starts when you're younger and you have no memory of these things, you sort of become blind to obvious symptoms. I mean, there's a lot of symptoms, for abductees, but for me, I had several experiences that I had not put together because they happened far apart. And my first known experience was when I was in my 20s, and I was getting ready to fall asleep one night, and I was laying in my bed, and my house was a 2-story house, and behind our house it was fenced in. There were trees There were no roads, houses, or anything. It was by itself. So right before I was getting ready to go to sleep, all of a sudden a blinding white hot light came through my window. I mean, it wasn't like somebody was standing there with a flashlight or anything, just lighting up a small space. It was so blinding, the whole room disappeared, and I closed my eyes very tightly. And then the next thing that I remembered was waking up the next day. And the first thing I did is I went over and looked out the window. I thought, what was that light I saw last night? And I thought that was weird. And so I sort of, just shrugged it off. And during the day, I started having a few bits and pieces of a weird dream. And the dream was that someone had came in my house. There were 3 of them. And they weren't human. They were in some kind of suits, and their faces were sort of obscured. I was in my living room. One of them took their hand and waved it over towards the corner of my room where I had a small library, and they conveyed to me that they had read every book just by waving their hand. And they showed some interest in a couple of books that I had up there, and I asked them, I said, where do you come from? And so they told me that they came from a place called Sumer that we knew as Samaria. And I thought, wow, that's very interesting. And then they showed me holographically an image of the star system that they came from, and also some kind of gold-looking liquid or substance. And I understood that to be their life force, that they consumed this. They were showing me about their life. Well, the next thing I knew, I was being taken up and disappeared through the ceiling. And when I passed through the ceiling, I was in like another reality. Everything that happened after that is a total blank. Later, I came back through to my home, and the first thing I thought of, I've got to remember this. I've got to remember that word, Sumer, Sumer. So I kept on saying that word, Sumer, over and over and over. Don't forget, Sumer, don't forget, don't forget. Because I could tell my memory was just leaving me. Well, I did forget that word. The only thing that I remembered was that it started with an S. So that's all I remembered. It started with a Yes, so it was like 8 or 9 years before I remembered the entire dream, and I actually was talking to a researcher, Derek Tyler, and he was telling me all the symptoms of abduction, and when I told him my story within a few minutes, he said, you're an abductee. And my family had more, instances after the Whistler UFO event. I found out later my sister had an event where she levitated and left her room. I mean, we have so many similarities, but we hadn't shared those details with each other. So everything added up, and I went back in my life and saw many things that became like synchronicity for connecting me with resources and people that guided me into what I do now, which is researching and talking to abductees and trying to bring awareness to the public. So it was a long road. There's many people out there right now that are abductees, but they don't know it. I might like to just mention a few of the signs of abduction because there's so many people that don't know those. Having missing time, and also strange marks on your body when you wake up. When you wake up and part of your clothing has been rearranged and you didn't go to bed looking like that. Sometimes people will short out electrical lights or different things, crying spells, depression, a lot of things, that are just weird that stay on your mind, and they usually always turn out in the long run to be related to abductions.
I've got a couple more questions I'd love to ask. Back up just a moment. Reading through an excerpt of your new book, there were a couple of things that really stood out to me. And one of them, it was a UFO flap, F-L-A-P. And I don't know what that is, and I'm willing to bet a lot of our listeners don't. Can you tell us what a UFO flap is?
Sure can. It was something new to me, too. I learned it actually when I went to a UFO conference, and I was speaking to Sherry Wild, who is the author of Forgotten Promise. And she had experienced living in a community that had a UFO flap, and she went on to explain that's when, after a few weeks or a month, sometimes it lasts longer, there are repeated reports of UFOs in the area. It may be from anywhere from 20 to 50 to 100 to a couple of thousand, like, in Whitfield, Virginia, where my parents had that experience. But it's a whole lot of UFO sightings reported from one area. And anytime there's repeated sightings of UFOs, that's called a UFO flap. And if you look up UFO flaps, it will go back in history, and it will tell all the different states and places that has happened. So that's what a UFO flap is.
Wow. I remember being in Missouri in the summer of 2012, and I was on an equity theater contract there, and over in Kansas City, they were having quite a spate of UFO sightings, and it was on the mainstream news because it couldn't be anything other than accept that this is really happening, and that may have been a UFO flap. And the other thing, Deborah, you talked about Sumeria, and again, I read that in your excerpt, and it stood out to me as well. The Sumerian language, I think one of the original languages on the planet, if I'm correct, and I'm wondering if you have if these experiences you've had with these off-world beings have caused you to have another connection with the Sumerian time period or the Sumerian culture, the language. Has that been a connecting point for you?
Well, it sure has, because when I realized that the missing word from that experience was Sumer, I went and looked it up. I had no idea what the word meant or where it was or anything. And it turns out that Sumeria is one of the oldest civilizations on Earth. Mm-hmm. And there were reports in their writings and their cuneiform drawings and stuff of the visitors that came from up above, from space, and that they came down and they taught the people how to do many things, like to make weapons and to use herbs and different things for healing, and several other different talents, I guess you would say. And the images sometimes portray people that look like they have a spacesuit on, and there's also UFO craft. And I knew nothing at all about this place, nothing. I'd never heard of it. I didn't have a computer back then. It was totally, I'd never read anything about it. So the odds that I would remember a word that had to do something with ancient visitors, perhaps they were the Anunnaki or other people from space, different planets and stuff, that's just too much of a coincidence. That really is synchronicity. After that, things started lining up that matched, that made sense to me, that made me look back and say, wow, that's what was really happening. So
that's what was really happening, yes. Well,
yes.
And you say in your book that we are disclosure. You're talking about yourself and people who've had abduction experiences, that you are disclosure, and this radio show is about healing, and it would seem to me, Deborah, that someone who's been through what you've been through, and there is a certain amount of trauma associated with the event, and then of course the aftermath, that there would be not only an adjustment in your daily life and your thinking, but there would be a need at some point to heal yourself as you assimilate these new experiences. And that there'd be others who've had similar experiences who might have thought they were alone and thought they dreamed it or they're going crazy. So there seems to be that there would be a healing element in all of this for yourself and for others. Is that so?
That is truly, truly so. And I will relate this thing that happened to me that is the second part of my book title, The Message of the Heartstone. You know, throughout all my life, you know, I had so many questions. I never felt really like I belonged, like I was different. Mm-hmm. And I didn't understand why I was able to do some things that other people couldn't do. I felt like I stood out. Many times I felt like I was going crazy. So sure. There was a time period where I was going through a very deep depression, and I actually thought about suicide. And I thought, man, I just want to drive off a cliff. You know, my 17-year marriage had ended. I just felt so disconnected. I had so many questions about my life, and it was such darkness for me. I just thought I want to end it all. And, you know, many people, you know, that are abductees go through things like this. They go through deep depression. So one day I decided I would take my kids and my two sons and drop them off at my daughter's house. And my heart was just crying out to the universe, you know. I really didn't want to do that, but I was so in such dark despair, and I didn't think anybody could help me. So my boys ran inside the house, and I opened the car door, and I stepped out. And then I don't know what happened. The next thing I knew, my hand was reaching down into the grass, even though I couldn't see anything. The grass was only like 4 inches tall. You know, they'd recently mowed their yard. I pulled out a heart-shaped stone. It was a small rock shaped like a heart. It had a little crack in it. And as I stood up, I looked at that stone, and I heard a voice say to me, even though your heart is broken, even though you feel like you can never love again, it is still a heart, and you can still love. And that message resonated with me so deeply, tears started pouring down my face. I looked around to see who said that to me, but of course there was nobody there. And I knew then that my life was going to be okay, that everything had happened to me for a reason to make me who I am now so that I can live a better life and to fulfill my destiny. So that little rock saved my life.
Your life. Yes, it did. And you know, you tell the story. I feel the tears, and I'm sure that people who are listening to this as it's being broadcast to can relate to that moment, that defining moment when you're able to claim your heart for your own and say, I'm standing in my own power. And maybe that voice you said there was no one there, Deborah. You were there for you. You were there in that moment, and you were receiving the energies of the universe. And who knows who that other voice was? You may never, in this lifetime, know that. But you were there. You showed up for you with your heart that had been broken, but was still a heart and could still love. And I'm sure people listening will have their own story, their own turning point in their lives where they have come to that point themselves, whether it's by virtue of being an abductee or a divorce, going through a divorce or a job or a loss or whatever those moments are, that we get to that I call point zero, where we make a choice whether we wish to live a full life or we wish to recede from life. And I really love that this was the beginning of the synchronicity that I've heard you say in the past was missing in your life. The need for the feeling of belonging, that there is a sense, there is an order, there is a sensibility and an intelligent order to your life. And I really offer you my highest praise for being courageous enough as a human being to live through what you live through in the way you live through, it, and to now apparently be turning all of this darkness inside out to help others. This is remarkable, Deborah. Congratulations.
Well, thank you so much, Deidre. I find it the love of my life, being able to help people, because coming out of that darkness that I was in gave me the self-confidence that I needed for myself. I didn't get it through a doctor or another person, but it came from a higher place, and whether people want to call it my guardian angel or whatever, it saved me. And afterwards, all of a sudden, I thought, I've got to write my book. I've got to write a book because I know now that it will be published, because there is meaning to the wisdom that I have, and everything that's happened to me has had a reason for it. I wrote a book, had never even used Microsoft Word, which was really hard for me. Within 3 months, I had written my book, and I sent it off, and it took 6 weeks, and I had 3 publishers wanting to publish it and publish that book.
Wow.
So after that, a friend of mine spoke to me about doing a radio show, and she said, well, what would you like to do a radio about? And I said, UFOs. And she laughed, and she said, what does someone from Mayberry, North Carolina, want to do a show about UFOs? I said, I just do. So that was another open door for me, and I came into the world of abductees, and I see all the same things that I went through. I see many, many people, good people, going through hard times. They're not able to sleep. They also think that they're nuts. Their family has ostracized them. Some of them have lost their jobs. They're so uncoordinated in their life, and they need some answers. And so what I do in my book for abductees, I talk about some simple things that will really help them, like how to get more sleep as an abductee. That is a big issue. So there are things in there to help with sleep, there's meditation, there's different things. There's even a few tips about how to stop some abductions that have worked for me, and advice that I've got from some of the top researchers in the field. So this book, I think, will be like a well-deserved Band-Aid on some serious wounds that abductees have, and I'm just honored to be able to put that out there. And if it could help one person, then I have changed my world around me, and that's all I care about. I don't care if it becomes a bestseller. I don't care about any of that. My goal is to help one person make some sense of their life, because in doing what I do, I have been able to reach out to hundreds of abductees and researchers and collaborate all of our information. And I have come up with some things that I think that are unique. And I know that people will be able to use those tools and to use it in their daily lives to help them have a better life.
Debra, this all sounds so important for people who've been through what you've been through. And again, I really commend you for taking time to produce this. And if you're developing new techniques, new tools, I think that's very valuable. And it seems like a good point in our conversation to ask you to tell our listeners where they can get your book, and to just offer a little bit of teasing information about what they can get out of the book that's going to benefit them.
Well, my book is currently now being uploaded to Kindle, and so it will probably take another week or two to tweak where they can find my book. The first words about it when it comes out will be on my Facebook page called Synchronicity, Message of the Heartstone, and they can go there, and that will give all the updates. All they have to do is like the page, and they will find out when the first copy is available. And I think that one of the things I'm looking forward to is hearing from other abductees that buy the book that can tell me things that happened to them, so that we can all sort of form a community. Abductees that don't stay in their dark shell like I did for such a long time and be fearful about finding out this information. We need to bring it to light, because only then will the darkness lose its power over you, is when you bring it to light and you talk with other people and you share it. And that will make the abductee community much stronger. And I think that if people read my book, I think it will open some doors for them. And I'm just glad that I'm in a position to be able to do that.
Oh, I am too, for you. So let me just go back over that for our listeners. So if anyone, well, I should say, let me rephrase that. If you are interested in Debra's book, Synchronicity, The Message of the Heartstone, and you're waiting for it to come out in anticipation of that, you can simply go to her Facebook page called Synchronicity. And let me make sure I say this right, Deborah. Synchronicity, the message of the Heartstone, is your Facebook page. Am I correct?
Right. Synchronicity, message of the Heartstone. That is my Facebook page. Yeah, I would love to hear from people, so I'm excited about people liking my page and everything.
Absolutely. So we can expect that book out sometime in January of 2018. And Deborah, what I would love to do is let's reconvene this conversation in a couple of weeks when your book is on the market, and let's begin to talk about the impact that it's having on the public and what people are saying about it. I would love to do that again if you're willing.
I would love that, Deidre. One of the things that I love about you is, you yourself are also intuitive, and I've been friends with you for a while, and you have such a positive vibe and energy, and I just want to thank you for being, I think I'm your first guest on this new show. So I'm very honored to be able to do that, and I just want to wish you many more great shows because you really have a knack for it. You are a natural, as they say. So thank you so much for having me on your show.
I so appreciate it. It's been such a privilege, and I think that we're all of us now who are awakening and remembering who we really are and doing that with such a love and a compassion for our planet are genuinely wishing to connect with each other on many levels. And this whole process of connecting seems to be so viable, so important, and this radio show seems to be such a valuable instrument and tool for us to connect on so many levels. And Deborah, I just thank you for taking time today out of your busy schedule to be here. So we'll do this again.
It's been a pleasure, Deidre. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Everybody who's listening, take care, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
The views and opinions expressed on this show are not necessarily those of the show and host. This podcast and its content are not intended to diagnose or treat any medical or mental condition or substitute for proper professional care in this regard. You've been listening to the Deidre Reigel Hope and Healing Radio Show, where your voice matters. We hope you have enjoyed this podcast and found inspiration for your own life. If you would like to be a guest on this show, please contact us at drhoperadio@gmail.com. That's drhoperadio@gmail.com. I'm Oliver Dill on behalf of all of us here at the Deidre Reigel Hope and Healing Radio Show, wishing you a day full of joy and goodness.